Hi everyone, you are back with us on this exploration through the Book of Hoshea or Hosea, and guiding us through this prophet is Rabbi Joshua Neely. If you've watched last week's, then you're up to date. If you didn't, there'll be a link up above us now that you can click to go and watch that video, and there'll be a link underneath this video too. We finished at chapter 2 verse 10, in which the Creator was saying that he was going to remove from Israel the benefits that he'd bestowed on her, being Israel, even though she thought she was getting those from her lovers, which were other gods. Is that where we're up to? It's very confusing. It's like a soap opera.
Well, it is. I mean, that's the whole idea. That's why the metaphor of faithlessness is so powerful in dealing with the relationship between the people and God, because it's something that people can relate to and understand the pain and the feeling of betrayal and the complete, idiocy of how do you betray that which has given you everything for something which has given you nothing? You know, how do you take the gifts that were given to you and give them to something else and then claim that something else is what is supporting you? It's just so illogical and yet so emotional and so easy to see that it happens all the time.
There are some elements of the vocabulary that's used, euphemisms and things in the rest of this verse that we're going to have to break down. And one of them, which really pickled my head for a while, is this first verse, which is chapter 2, verse 11. Therefore I will return and take my corn in its time and my wine in its appointed season, and I will separate my wool and my flax to cover her nakedness. So, I thought I understood what that meant, but it seemed to me that first I think we need to have a look at what and my wine might mean, and also then go on to how he can separate my wool, his wool and his flax, and cover her nakedness. That for me didn't make much sense. So is there something behind here that we don't know about in the text?
Well, I mean, part of it is if you're a farmer, you know that different things come at certain times, and if they don't show up on certain times, then you've got a problem. You know, that's the failure of the crop, and that's really what the first two metaphors are talking about here, about the grain not coming when it's supposed to, the wine not coming when it's supposed to. And that's exposing that without God, there is no support. You know, you're not going to have anything if you really end up breaking this relationship with God. Then the phrase of the wool and the linen, again, these are bounties of agriculture. These come from the sheep and they come from the flax, and therefore God can take them away whenever desired. And the phrase at the end is translated differently in different texts. So another common translation for the end is they will be snatched away they will snatch away those that cover her nakedness. Right? It's the wool and the flax cover her nakedness, and that will be removed. So she will be laid bare, she will be laid exposed, which works very well with verse 12, with the next sentence, which has a very similar theme.
Before we jump into 12, am I reading too much into it that wool and flax are not supposed to be mixed?
It doesn't mean that it can't be there, but it doesn't mean it has to be there. Let me put it that way. Right.
All right.
So
okay.
The idea, of course, of Shatnitz, of the forbidden mixture of wool and flax is certainly there, but wool and flax also are just the main products that were used for creating garments. And therefore you would be covered in wool or flax. People were not generally running around wearing leather. So this was basically saying strip your clothes off you, but by saying wool and flax literally, it's reminding us of the agricultural origin of what you are wearing. This didn't come from your lovers. This did not come from your own hands out of nothing. This came from what God had given us as our bounty. And if God wants to take it away, you're going to be left exposed.
Okay. And from 12, and now I will bear her disgrace before the eyes of her lovers, and no man shall save her from my hand. So as you said, everything's been removed from her, and she's there now without the baubles and the clothes and everything that she thinks she's gained through her own work and adultery. And she's in the position, Israel is going to be in the position where she's standing naked, everyone's going to see what she's done, and no one can step in the way.
And it's an interesting quote from Rashi on that last idea, that he says not even the merit of the ancestors will be there to blunt God's judgment and criticism of the people.
What does he? Can you break that down for us?
Sure. So, Zichut Avotenu, the merit of the ancestors. The idea was that God had a covenant with Abraham, God had a covenant with Isaac, and a covenant with Jacob. And part of those covenants were that God would be there and defend and support their descendants. And therefore, there's a certain feeling that sometimes, even if we don't deserve God's full care and support and defense, God's still making good on those original promises, on that original covenant. So we are sort of benefiting from the fact that our ancestors had this relationship with God. That's by their merit that we are protected. But what Rashi is pointing out from his understanding of what Hosea is saying here is that in an ultimate time when we completely rupture and breach the covenant, then even God's diligence to the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is not going to stay his hand from punishing and judging us for what we have done.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. And I will lay waste her vines and her fig trees, which she said, they are my hire, which my lovers have given me, and I will make them a forest, and the beasts of the field shall devour them. I get the impression that this is again talking about agriculture, and also there's something implicit in fig trees, that it's kind of a sign of wealth, or that everyone should have their own fig tree. It can nurture them and support them, and it's a sign of stability and strength, and you kind of looking after yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, these are the this is moving, to the full staples of what were the benefits of the land and what everybody needed or should have ideally to support themselves. Yes.
And they are my hire. I'm assuming she's saying that, look, I'm responsible for these.
No.
No. Okay. Good.
More that she got paid by her lovers with these.
Right. I see. My hire. Now that makes sense.
So
yeah.
it's like,
okay.
Another way of putting it might be like my fee or my payment. This is what I earned whoring myself around. And therefore they're mine. And God is saying, no, they're not. They are not really yours, and you didn't earn them by going after these idols. You got them because I was gracious enough to bless you. And now that you have completely forsaken me, then I'm going to take back that blessing.
And that he will make them unruly and unusable, and that the animals are going to come in and eat up anything good that they produce, and they'll be useless from now on. Exactly.
So they'll just go back to nature.
And I will visit upon her, again, it's Hosea's wife, and on Israel, more to do with Israel.
More to do with Israel than this, yes.
I will visit upon her the days of the Baalim, which I believe is gods, to whom she burnt incense, and she adorned herself with earrings and her jewelry, and went after her lovers, and she forgot me, says the Lord.
So visit upon, the phrase that's used here is pakadati. It's actually the same word that's used, the same verb that's used when God remembers Sarah and gives her Isaac. So this is a sense of giving someone their just deserts, or fulfilling the promise. Being mindful and watchful, but in this particular case, it's the negative side of being watchful. I'm going to hold you to account, or I'm going to make accounts good. And in this particular case, you have spent your days with the Baalim, and therefore you will get what you deserve for that time.
It's good, because if I read that in English, I will visit upon her the days of the Baalim, I wouldn't. It doesn't explain itself very well in this translation, so I'm grateful especially that you have different translations and an understanding of what that means already. That's great. And that's something important. If you're at home and you're watching this and your Bible doesn't make sense and you don't know Hebrew, then open another one. And if that doesn't help, ask a rabbi. I always find that super helpful. It's explaining here that she used to dress herself up, and I assume that in the context of Israel, that would mean erecting idols and visiting other temples and having whole different procedures for how they practice their faith and religion.
Exactly. I mean, you have the parallel between what his wife was doing, Gomer, and going after her fellows, and what Israel was doing when going after the idols. And they got dressed up. They went and celebrated. They partied with the idols, and they did it with enthusiasm, and they showed great honor and joy in engaging in that idolatry.
Therefore, behold, I will allure her and lead her into the desert, and I will speak comfortingly to her.
Right. So this is where the chapter turns from warning to hope. So the idea here is that, yes, you are going to be stripped bare. You are going to be laid exposed for how debased you have been and how faithless you have been. But lachein, nevertheless, or therefore, I will have to speak to your heart. That phrase at the end is really about speaking to her heart, is the literal translation. And I will call you back, and you will come back through the wilderness. And this is essentially going back to the honeymoon stage of Israel's existence, meaning a reliving of the exodus from Egypt in a new exodus from wherever we have become scattered after God removed his protection from us, which of course we eventually see as being in Babylon. But this is also can be read as being for the future as well.
I was going to ask you about that because later on...
I guessed you were.
Yeah, there's some very specific parts which now we look at as kind of messianic prophecy, which haven't happened yet. And when I got to that, I thought, well, does that mean that the rest of this is to come? Or is it a rinse and repeat until you get it right? You haven't done the math properly yet, so you don't get the cookie. But you get to learn from your mistakes. We'll get there, but it's kind of... it's interesting. Okay, so we go on to 17. And I will give her vineyards from there, and the depth of trouble for a door of hope, and she shall dwell there as in the days of her youth, as the days of her ascent from the land of Egypt. Now, I thought firstly that first line is beautifully poetic, especially the depth of trouble for a door of hope. That was very plain to me, where other passages are not so, and I just thought it was a lovely picture of a candle in the window when you're trying to find your way home. So, as you said, there's this promise of kind of removing her from the situation she's in and starting her off and hitting that reboot button, and in that instance leading her back to a proverbial desert, and giving her back the things that she needs, and also giving her hope even in a place where she may feel desolate and removed.
Exactly, because it ultimately comes coming back to the question that God is not looking to punish for the sake of punish. God is looking for a return of Israel. He's looking for Israel to change and become faithful full time, and that's the goal. So if God did not extend the opportunity for return, if God was not constantly reminding us that there was an option to return, then once we messed up, we would just disappear. And clearly we haven't.
And it shall come to pass on that day, says the Lord, you shall call me Ishi, and I shall and you shall no longer call me Baali. So you're going to have to break down for us what Ishi, which
right.
I think I've heard before somewhere.
Almost certainly.
And Baali, which I assume is a type of Baal.
Okay, so first of all, one little Hebrew bit that gets sometimes lost in the translation. Bayom hahu, in that day. This is generally considered throughout prophetic language to be the day of the end of days. So it's used over and over again as the whenever you see Bayom Hahu on that day as
Isn't
being
that is that sung in a
from the prophet Zechariah at the very end of a prayer that we call Aleinu, where we
right?
say
That's
on
it.
that day God's name will be one, all people will come to recognize God. You know, that's sort of the idea that's there from Zechariah, and that's the exact right. We use Bayom Hahu because over and over again throughout the prophets they mean on this final day when everything goes right, this is the way it's going to be. So, with that in mind, we have to, and I'm surprised that the translation you have didn't at least put in brackets what in the world was going on here, because this is going back to like our first chapter when the names of his children were so important. This is very critical. So, in Hebrew, the usual way to call your husband is Baal, and that because that literally means sort of like master. And there's all sorts of non-PC reasons for that, of why a wife would call her husband master, Baal. But of course, what the prophet is playing on here, is riffing on here, is that if you call me Baali, my husband, you're still mentioning the name of the pagan deity that you disgraced yourself with because it happens to be the same name. And so instead, you will call me Ishi, my man. Ish being the Hebrew word for man and being the natural parallel for Isha, which is the word for wife. So rather than it being wife and master, it'll be wife and husband. Will be the words that would be used now.
No, that's very interesting, especially about the Baal meaning master. I must mention that to my wife when she gets home. We'll see how she takes it.
Yeah, and that part really gets made more explicit in the next verse of why we're getting rid of that term.
And I will remove the names of the Baalim from her mouth, and they shall no longer be mentioned by their name. Is because again, I read a few different commentaries behind this. It's more seemed to me more to do with the connection between Israel and other gods from an outside perspective. So you wouldn't think Israel and then think, oh, they worship these crazy dragon gods, and you wouldn't think crazy dragon god and then imagine Israel worshipping it.
Exactly. I mean and this expunging of the word Baal will be so extreme that even innocent words like, well, husband, will be removed and changed to another form to refer to your spouse.
Mm. There's still a bit of that around today. I mean, in some corners, even from my tradition, I know there aren't many, but I know some people who have left the church, gone towards Judaism, and they won't mention any of the names which they came across in church for Jesus or anything else, because they look at this verse and say, this isn't a name that I can say anymore. I'm not sure if, because there are other places as well where it says, the words of foreign gods shouldn't be on your lips. I don't know if that's as explicit as it means, or if it's more about you having a kind of a longing for the word when you say it. But it's interesting to read here that a phrase like Baal, which I'm sure, like you said, had different connotations, should be rinsed out of the vocabulary.
I mean, everybody has their own emotional connection and emotional trigger points when it comes to a faith that they have left behind. So even though there's not an explicit prohibition in general about mentioning them as simply historical facts, or there were people who worshiped these gods or those gods, or even you might say, I used to be involved in such and such a faith, but now I'm Jewish. If emotionally saying those words is going to continue to either bring you pain or continue to rekindle a longing, then just like one probably should refrain from mentioning an ex-girlfriend with whom one still has a spark, so too you probably should avoid saying those names. But it isn't a categorical prohibition.
That's a great response. Okay. And I will make a covenant for them on that day with the beasts of the field and with the fowl of the sky and the creeping things on the earth. It takes you straight back to Genesis. And the bow and the sword and war I will break off the earth, and I will let them lie down safely. So this is the verse. This is the verse where I read and I say, well, that hasn't happened yet. And therefore, has Israel not fulfilled or undergone the process yet that we've started to talk about in this chapter?
Has Israel not fulfilled? Not 100%. Has God not fulfilled in the sense of having sent a Messiah and a Redeemer to bring us back? Also, not 100%. Or even that hasn't even begun, at all. But the idea here, of course, is that in the end of days, yes, and by Yom Hahu, again, we get that phrase. This is what it will look like, and you'll know you're there when this is what you're experiencing. Lots you can do in the meantime, but the whole party has to get there. It's not just about each individual's journey.
And I think the core of this is that on that day when that happens, violence from war will be lifted, but also I get the impression that violence from within nature will be gone. But there are other verses where that says that the kid will be able to play in the viper's nest, a child will be able to play in the viper's nest, and the lion will lay down with a lamb, and the other bits.
Right.
And this, I think, and it's interesting how that all meshes together. That you can get a firm profile of the last days from all these little snippets from all the prophets, and they all just link together so perfectly well.
Well, they all were drawing from the same source, so that's not surprising. But it also is a wonderful reminder, and all the other pieces you mentioned, that the Jewish vision of redemption and of what we are looking for when we talk about salvation is an end to suffering, is an end to physical violence and pain in this world that will then allow us to grow spiritually without that threat being ever present.
And I will betroth you to me forever, and I will betroth you to me with righteousness and with justice and with loving kindness and mercy. And I will betroth you to me with faith, and you shall know the Lord. Will I go on to the next verse?
Nope, that's a perfect little set.
Isn't Israel already betrothed to the Creator? I know this is poetry, and it's an analogy, but I'll hear arguments again from certain groups that the Creator's divorced Israel and they're separated. And
even though there's very clear statements in Isaiah,
right?
What are you talking about divorce? Show me your get. Show me your divorce document. I mean, it's rebutted within Isaiah itself.
But here we've got a promise saying that I will betroth you to me forever.
What we're talking about here is a renewal of vows. The idea is that, like Gomer, the wife of Hosea that we met in chapter 1, they were married, but they were not married with actual goodness and faithfulness and trust. I mean, there was an estrangement that was built into their relationship from day one. And what God is saying here is that at this point, our relationship, our marriage, our betrothal, our espousement will be built entirely on what is good and right, and there will be therefore no room for you to stray ever again. So it's not just a renewal of the vows, it's a deepening of the vows, of truly being connected to God appropriately. This phrase has become something that is said daily for when we're putting on tefillin. When we are wrapping the straps around our finger, each one of these espousals or betrothals is a phrase that is recited. And there's a very sort of deep symbolism there that as we are wrapping this around our finger, it's almost like we are putting a ring on our hand, like we are getting married at that moment. Well, one thing I should point out, this phrase of you'll be betrothed to me in righteousness and justice, Tzedek Mishpat, is in the Rashi, he points out that this will be practiced among you, right? This is how you're going to be behaving. So it's not that God is going to become more righteous or more just. It's we will become more righteous and more just.
Isn't there an allusion there to Abraham, and again to the reason that he found righteousness in the Creator's eyes was because he lived out righteousness and justice.
Hmm. Exactly right. It's what he was seeking, and then he realized that there was an ultimate source for what he was looking for.
And it shall come to pass on that day that I will answer, says the Lord. I will answer the heavens, and they shall answer the earth. I have nothing for this.
It continues on to the next verse.
And the earth shall answer the corn, and the wine, and the oil, and they shall answer Jezreel. Now, so are we talking about literally the Creator sending the right type of weather at the right season to produce the right crop to support the people?
Exactly right. So we began with this notion of the vineyards failing, the orchards failing, the crops failing, the wheat, the flax, the wool, all of that failing and being stripped away, and now it is all being given back, and the wine and the grain are going to be where they're supposed to be and when they're supposed to be, and it comes all the way back to Jezreel, of course, which was in chapter 1, which we were talking about had been the site of the betrayal in the northern kingdom that God was at that moment in the prophecy calling to account.
Okay, now this last one in this chapter, verse 25, is a hot topic. And it's a hot topic because it's used with many of the people I kind of hang around with online. You'll find some areas will say that this is talking about Jews that don't know they're Jews. Other areas will say that it's talking about non-Jews who are going to become Jews. And some will say that it's not about Jews at all. And I will sow her... and I will sow her for me in the land, and I will have compassion upon the unpitied one, and I will say to them that are not my people, you are my people, and they shall say, you are my God. Now again, we're going to echo back to Ruth, like we said last week, and Ruth came up again. Is this speaking about the lost tribes, or about, I shall call one from a town and two from a family, which we get another place in the prophets? Is it about non-Jews who become Jews, non-Israelites that become Israelites? So, I've read commentaries which will say they are proselytes. Some will say that they're people that return from idolatry.
So this is, I guess you could say, open to interpretation, but it's always best to start with the most narrow or easiest interpretation within the context of the prophet himself, within Hosea. So if we go back to the earlier stages of his prophecy, these phrases, lo ruchama, right, the one who is not pitied, and lo ami, right, not my people, those were names that were given to the children of Hosea. Mm-hmm. And those were metaphorically, of course, being used as names for the people of Israel who were betraying God through idolatry. So what's being described here is that those people of Israel who were being cast out for their faithfulness, or who were the product of faithlessness, are going to be returned back and will be able to live in the land and be at peace and be successful. So that, I think, is the most straightforward interpretation of what the prophet is getting at here. Does this mean there will also be other people who come in the final days and who want to join? Well, that's certainly possible, although there is some debate about whether or not people will become Jewish after the Mashiach has arrived, or whether people will simply come to God as monotheists in their own way. But that's a whole nother discussion, I imagine.
Good. I just wanted to cover all the bases before you answered, and we get the proper answer based on the book. So that's the end of this chapter. Join us next week for chapter 3. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got questions about this book in general, make sure you leave them underneath. And if we haven't covered it yet, we'll bring it up. And if we have, then maybe at the end we'll do a summation of some of the questions which you have which weren't answered. Thank you very much, Rabbi Neely, for joining us and for leading us through this program.
Thank you.
It's super fun. I'm learning a ton, and I'm sure the people at home are too. And we'll see you all again next time.
Bye.